Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Recruiters with No Limits. Always live and never scripted. I'm here with my sidekick and co-host, John Ruffini. What's up, Johnny?
Good afternoon.
And we have a special guest. We're going to bring him on right now. Across the pond, I'm going to say it like that, Johnny Campbell from, you know it, Social Talent. What's up, Johnny?
Hey, Richard. Hey, John. It's a pleasure to be here, guys.
I got to ask you a question. Is it St. Paddy's Day in your country all the time?
You know what? It kind of feels like that sometimes. You know, I'd like to think that stereotype isn't true, and I'd like to get offended by it. It's pretty awesome. Like, I'll tell you, we were all away last week. We brought the whole company to Austria skiing as a kind of end of COVID, kind of end of 2 year of hell period and celebration, and we all went skiing. And like 25 people came on the trip, right? And we were in a bar on Saturday night watching the Irish rugby game against France. And during the course of the evening, we drank 300 Jägermeister between us. So it's really hard for me to dispute that stereotype that every day is Patrick's Day. What can I say?
That sums it up, John,
Wow.
right? Wow.
Hey, a good time was had by all.
Well, somebody, I counted 2 Jägermeister I had. So somebody else had a heck load more than I did. I swear it was only 2.
Okay, I got to ask you real quick before we jump into it. Do you guys chill your Jägermeister or is it room temp?
So literally we were up a mountain where it was -6 outside. So you don't really get a whole lot of choice. But yeah, you chilled. Room temperature Jägermeister is even more disgusting than chilled Jägermeister.
Agreed.
Right.
Agreed. Very good.
Well, hey, thanks for coming on the show. Let's just hear a little bit about yourself. And I'm just going to say this, the worldwide platform of Social Talent. I mean, it's amazing. I've learned so much from it over the years, Johnny. Every time I need something, I just click on it and you guys have the advice.
Richard, thank you. It was a long time getting here. Give you a quick background to myself. I started as a recruiter working in staffing 24 years ago and started my own staffing agency with my business partner about 15 years ago. And that was probably when social media was blowing up. LinkedIn was becoming a thing. Social was a place you could source talent from. And long story short, we realized that there was more to be made by teaching the world how to use these new tools than there was for just being another staffing agency at the time. So over the next decade, I guess, Social Talent grew from being me in a room with 15 other people every day, traveling around, doing some training, to a platform with 90 speakers teaching folks how to not only hire, but also attract talent, onboard talent, engage talent, lead that talent, and do so in an inclusive way. So pleasure to be part of that journey, and we're only getting going.
It is a great platform, and I had the pleasure of running into you and some of your colleagues at the last LinkedIn Live that was held. I don't know if they're ever going to do that again. Hope so. But the technology you guys use for your training platform is very engaging. It's easy on the eyes, so to speak, because I love the fact that you always have an instructor and you have a presentation, and it feels like very engaging, even though you're watching something on a video screen. I can remember years ago, Johnny, I'm dating myself here, at a couple employers prior, I went through and got certified through your Ninja program. Which was the only one of its kind at the time. It was revolutionary, and you really did open up the eyes of a lot of recruiters as far as how to source and where to source.
It's true, and today sourcing is probably not the core thing that folks learn anymore. They learn how to interview, they learn how to be a better talent advisor, better partner, learn how to drive more inclusive hiring processes, how to lead. It's evolved, right? The challenges of 10 years ago are maybe less of the challenge today, and there's always something new, right? This is the thing about education. You never run out of stuff to learn. You're never done. You're never full as a recruiter. Like I dare the recruiter who comes to me and say, yeah, I got it all. I know it all. We're finished. You may have thought that 2 years ago. Then this pandemic comes along, then this Great Resignation comes along, and everything changes. It's always changing, right? That's the beauty. But your point about the platform was something that we learned early, right? Because I'm not from a learning background, right? I didn't come from an L&D corporate background. I'm a staffing recruiter at heart, right? And I knew that people like me were time poor. They needed to get things done really quickly. They're under typically quite a lot of pressure. And you got to teach them something really fast, but you also got to engage them in doing so. So, the typical boring crap you see in learning just didn't work for me, both as software and content. On the content side, we realized quite early on that it was half about information and half show business. What I mean by that is you gotta engage somebody, and we're all these days particularly so used to high quality video content, and typically high quality video content for free. If you're paying either money or your time to spend 10 minutes with somebody, they want to give you really good tips. They want to do it in a really good way and not waste your effing time. So that's
Exactly.
a really important part. So building it for the user from day one was critical.
And give them something that they can immediately try and apply. It's not something where it's going to take forever and it takes a long time to, okay, I've now got a budget an hour to put that into play. It's like you could learn it and then you could go apply it and put it, into action and see the results right away, which also is important nowadays.
It's funny you mentioned that. Originally, when we built our curriculum, John, we kind of started with like, what's the A, and then you work your way to Z, right? Because logically you think, well, I'll start my process that way. But that doesn't work, because the recruiter you're sitting down to teach, she's not starting at A. She's starting like at J. She's got a rec she needs to fill. So whilst it would be good to tell her, for example, you should have a good online presence and be building all this kind of stuff, if you start with that curriculum, she's just going to disconnect. So you go, right, somebody's screaming at you for talent. I'll help you find talent. Let's do that. And it's like, oh, wow, I found this new talent. You go, next thing, you need them to reply to you and engage you. I'll teach you that next. And then they reply and engage, and you're getting somewhere. And when you've earned that kind of credit with that learner, then you can go, by the way, if you did this other thing earlier, that would have all been better. Can I show you that? And then the learner goes, okay, I'll have a look. I'll give you that extra time. Let's call it more medium to long tail. But most people just want to solve the problems right in front of them. And you got to earn their trust by solving those problems straight away.
So it incrementally builds upon itself. And I imagine you get the enthusiasm of the learner the more you go. One thing that always puzzled me, and I'm sure that you deal with this with some of your clients, it amazes me that too many recruiters treat every social platform as if it's just a job board.
Yep.
Yeah. This is a challenge, right? I just had a great podcast earlier where I got to sit in the seat that both of you are sitting with a great guest, and we talked about recruiting marketing. Right, this was a Laurie Sylvia. You might know Laurie out of Boston. She was the former CMO for Smashfly, and she's built a whole kind of community around recruitment marketing. And she shared with me from her platform data that she only published on Monday, which showed that you get like something like, we know this, right? But the pure data to show it, that you're getting 200% more engagement from content about culture than you are about jobs. What I mean is, like, I'm talking about like not a video about here's what the jobs in our company are like, what's working here. Culture videos and content have 200% more engagement. And right down the bottom of the list are, job profiles, right? Your actual jobs that you share. We all know this, right? But having the data to support it gives recruiters that argument. It's like, people don't want the job in the first instance, right? They might want to know, do you have jobs for people like me? Great. Well, like, there's loads of jobs for, let's say, a recruiter or an engineer or a salesperson, right? I could be that anywhere. Why should I do it with these people? I think it's even changed now because, 2022, it's like, why should I log on and interact with these people? Because I'm not even going to an office for the most part anymore.
It's true.
Choose like, who do I want to be on a Zoom or team calls with? So culture is so important, because I don't care if you have a great office. Free lunches doesn't work for me anymore. Everyone gives me a MacBook or a nice a Surface laptop. So it really comes down to who is on the other end of that Zoom call.
Well, hey, Johnny, how do you change the recruiter's mindset? I mean, they're so embedded into that, just that boring, what you say, we want to be entertained. How do you change that?
One step at a time, Richard, is kind of the short answer, but it really is about kind of pulling back and looking at the big picture, right? And you can only do that when you give the recruiter a little bit of room. I think one of the biggest challenges we're seeing in the last 12 months is that recruiters are, for the most part, really under fire at the moment. Like, it's never been busier. Their rec loads are crazy. And all the things you should be doing right, so even learning, right? So learning how to do it better, putting time and investing in those, that's great. And everyone will nod and agree that they should do that, but they're literally under fire. So there's a real challenge with how do you balance that workload with changing and improving processes and ways of doing things that might not pay off in the immediacy of a day, which is often the pressure you're under, right? Like maybe if imagine being a contract recruiter right now. Imagine you're doing temp staff. Like, hell, you need to like fill recs and for people to be in the role tomorrow morning. In this market, that's like crazy. And you're telling that person you need to spend more time on promoting culture. It's like yeah, I get it, but like you got to give me some time. So I think it's a real time for leaders to step up and give their team the time and push back on the business to say, we'll never solve your hiring needs because my team are going to quit. They're going to walk out the door because they know there's a better way of doing it. They don't have time to stop. So it's not just as simple as, knowing that it's going to be better if you do it this way. You got to give recruiters room to breathe and grow at the moment.
Do you think, real quick, Johnny, that recruiters got relaxed with the Indeed and job boards and just, click on a post and wait for somebody?
Well, I wouldn't say got relaxed with it, Richard, right? If it works, like why would you bother sourcing on LinkedIn for talent if you could run an ad and get like all the applicants you need in an hour? If they were the quality you needed and the hiring manager was happy, like I don't think that's a problem. I think that's clever, right? I never had time for recruiters who would tell me how they magically source somebody through this really weird purple squirrel way when I know they could have just put an ad out and got somebody, right? Gotcha. I kind of think that's a waste of your time. This isn't a competition to build the best Boolean search. That was always my thing about sourcing. This is a competition to hire the best talent by any means necessary. Now, maybe it takes a great Boolean search. Maybe it takes a real good knowledge of how to recruit on Facebook. But if running an ad worked, you should do that. But it stopped working. Stop working in loads of different professions first and eventually just stop working in general, right? When you get to a market that we're in at the moment. So that's the thing is don't get wedded to anything. Don't get wedded to Indeed, but don't get wedded to writing Boolean searches and sourcing either, because that might fail on you eventually and you got to move on to something else.
It's all like a bunch of tools in your toolbox. You got to figure out what you need at any given point in time and keep your skills sharp and always be open, to your point, to evolution. I mean, things are going to change and you have to adapt with the way the industry has rolled. I always say, ground wise, the industry is still grounded in the same fundamentals, but how we execute, we have to adapt based on the climate that we're operating in. Do you see? I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to just use an example of that, because I think you're so right, John. A friend of mine, good childhood friend of mine, is a mechanic, independent mechanic, runs his own garage with a few people working for him. He now has to specialize in classic cars because he and his team cannot service modern cars because they're computers, right? And you need dealerships so he only works on classic cars because he either said, I got to adapt my whole skill set, which means becoming huge and buying into that whole ecosystem of the digital stuff. Or I kind of realize what I have and then apply it to what still works for those skills. So I think, recruiting and everything else is the same, to your point. You gotta be able to adapt to those changes or become super niche in what you do.
I heard there's a big car show that's going to happen in LA in the not so distant future, all focused on electric vehicles. And that's a whole nother spectrum for anybody in the auto industry. You mentioned your friend who's a mechanic. I can't even imagine what that entails. If you're, as that fleet grows across the world, and then customizing those cars, making them look and feel like regular cars, old cars, classic cars. There's always disruption. There's always disruption.
Always. But, you can't just sit there. I've seen, particularly in the last 2 years, and I'm sure both of you have, Richard and John, right? We saw a load of recruiters leave the profession in early 2020 because, recruiting was the worst job to have in early 2020, right? There's a lot of people being laid off and they found new roles. Now, a lot of those folks stayed away from the industry. But then we've seen a bounce like we've never seen before, where there are more vacancies today than there's ever been. And there's a whole new generation of people who are going into recruiting. We're seeing them. Our customers are using our platform to train them up from scratch. We see people hiring people who've never worked in the industry before, not early in career folks necessarily, right? Not graduates necessarily. This impression that they're all 22-year-olds joining recruiting isn't the thing. These are former restaurant managers. They're former F&B servers. They're former retail associates.
Second career type people.
Second or third career, going, you know what, I'm good with people. I can work hard under pressure, and I'm okay with computers. And they can do, like, we see folks go through our training programs, and there's loads of others that you could do. Don't get me wrong, in a matter of 4 to 8 weeks, and build up a competency that can be as good as an experienced recruiter if you have the other elements that are required to recruit. The more empathetic, softer skills are core skills. So they're the generation, to use the motor analogy again, they're the generation that will be working on the electric cars and come up with innovative ways, because they've never, imagine, they come in and they've never known motors that don't have electric motor or aren't autonomous. Yet you have a whole previous generation, the pre-2020 recruiters, who are so used to the nuts and bolts and mechanics of it that they'll struggle perhaps more. So you look at that new dynamic, right? There's a whole different breed of recruiters that are now working in the industry, and it's probably more than half of them are new in the last 2 years to recruiting. They won't have a challenge with these new things because it's all they've ever known.
It's a great point. It's a really good point.
It is. Wow.
And
Hey, Johnny, I got to ask you now, video resumes here in the United States, they're taking off big time. Do you see this across the world, that everybody's going to this new platform of video resumes?
No.
Video interviewing. I love it.
Right. And there are challenges. I don't, it's not that it won't ever go that way. The way, the way that we search and we store data in recruiting, right? And then match recs against folks. Video is difficult to do that with, right? It can be done. You can transcribe the video into text, but it's unstructured. And a lot of the software tools just can't take an unstructured video to text piece of information, structure it, and then put it in the database. Or they can, it still gives the candidate a worse chance. So you still need a written record, right, in a structured way to get in there. To add a new personality to it, a video is amazing. And I think that's the difference. So, you think about a first cut, you need a traditional resume or online profile that's structured with your right information. That has not gone away. That is absolutely still required in 2022. But then when you make that first cut of who has the requirements or closely matches it, then you can elevate yourself with a video introduction. Like I like the new thing LinkedIn brought in last year or so, where you can put that little kind of video piece on your photo, and you can make it a little intro piece to kind of explain who you are or whatever it might be. I love that. I think that's where we'll see video as a method to elevate, not as a replacement for the resume.
That's a great point. So you've got a unique scope because your company does business UK, Northern Europe, United States. What commonalities are you seeing in today's market with the struggles that we're having to find talent? And what differences do you see?
Yeah, so our customers are headquartered 50% in the US, the rest in mainly Northwestern Europe and the UK. Our users are in 95 countries, and they're really broadly spread. So the user challenges are the same the world over. I'm asked always, what are the differences between recruiting in this market and that market? And you know what? I've gone and looked and I've talked to the same people, and every one of those markets thinks there are many differences. But when you put it down, there aren't, right? Human behavior is broadly the same. So that's one point. The second piece is just around what are the dynamics of that economy and how progressive is recruiting in that market. Now that does make a difference. There are still markets where spray and pray is largely the way that it's done, where recruiting isn't a defined role. It's still a part of HR, and it's a task you do when you need to do it. It's not actually a role. That still exists in some markets, right? And that still exists in big markets like the US in some companies, as we all know. So it is different around the world from that perspective. But how do you encourage somebody to be interested in your role and engage with your organization and then come work for you? That's very similar. The extreme example I was given was in Japan. About 3 years ago, I was working with one of our customers, and they asked me to help the early in career team in Japan for this massive blue chip multinational tech company. And I was like, okay, I'll go see if I can help them. And so we did a bunch of calls to just flush out what are the challenges. Because I'd read a lot about Japanese staffing culture, and if both of you have any familiarity with Japan, you'll know that it has a reputation for being very different, both in terms of how people hire, but also the attitude to work and longevity, work commitment to employers, etc. So maybe this is a big different market. When I got down to it, and particularly early in career, and did the research and talked to the teams, it turns out that it's exactly the same as the Western world, the rest of the world, right? And largely due to the fact that if you're a 24-year-old Japanese engineer or a sales manager, your world is influenced by Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and you don't see borders there. You see other people your age doing things in different markets, like having a job and changing it after 2 years and then having a different career. And you don't care about societal culture in Japan going back 100 years and how it used to be done. You're like, that's what I'm going to do. And that is what the recruiters in Japan were sharing with me, is like, this is our population. It's crazy to the kind of 40 and 50-year-olds in executive roles in Japan, but this kind of under 30 group, they don't care about how it used to work. So I think you see that in nearly every market. The social element has influenced our expectations of the work environment, and we're less influenced by what our country culture is, and more influenced by what do people like us on these channels do, and what's their attitude to work. So I think that's where you're seeing the changes.
Gets back to what you were saying about the interest lying more in culture than anything else.
Yeah. People want the same things. They want freedom. They want to pursue their own personal interests. They've got family interests they want to look after. These are largely the same issues. There's differences, obviously, at a local level, but the broad themes are the same. Pretty much across all generations, all markets, it's broadly the same. Now, there's a difference in channels, right? So your go-to-market for recruitment advertising or job board is going to be different in every market, right? That should go without saying, right? Some markets like China and South Korea have just different channels where you'll have to be on. And then there's slight differences in technology that give you different opportunities to engage in those channels, right? With folks. And then there's an expectation of what you can do, with mobile. Like we saw in Asia, mobile being a much larger factor in recruiting than it was in the US. Most of the US folks I work with were overconfident that the US led the world and stuff. And I went to China about 7 or 8 years ago working with a customer, and everything was mobile. Like you could apply. We did some work with Oracle in China, and back like 8 years ago, we were in Beijing, and you could go on to WeChat, and you could see the open recs, and you could just apply by saying, I want to apply. And then it would give you an automated update of where you are in the application process all through WeChat. Like,
wow.
Wasn't done, right? We're talking about how do you just post a job on Facebook 8 years ago? It's like, well, people are applying for jobs, getting live updates without having to talk to a recruiter through WeChat. Like you do see
brilliant
there where there's just an evolution of how you use different technologies that sometimes in US and Europe we get a bit arrogant and confident that we are going to be the top of the food chain, and there's plenty of parts of the world where they're doing things ahead of us. And if you have a more open mind, you're going, fundamentally that works with people. It's probably going to work here eventually when that becomes a thing. So how can we learn from that?
Wow, that is good stuff. So Johnny, I'm going to pick your brain now. Facebook jobs, February 22nd, it's done with Facebook jobs. What's your take on that? I mean, everybody's panicking over here. I know that.
Oh, you know what? All my friends are panicked that they won't be able to get spam with jobs on Facebook anymore. They're so upset. Really? Like, did anyone ever like Facebook jobs? Did anyone think jobs on Facebook ever worked? It's come back to, what do you want out of networks? I think there's an opportunity to influence on Facebook and Instagram around culture and getting awareness of a brand, an employer brand, that we want to work for company X, that they're a good employer, that they have the right jobs for people like me. That's absolutely something you can do and be quite clever on. On Instagram or Facebook, but people didn't go to Facebook ever to search for a job. They just didn't, right? I just don't believe that. So they have used LinkedIn to search for jobs, right? They built a job board in their social site, and that works because it's a professional network, right? Did Twitter ever have a job board? They did not, because they realized it wasn't for them. So I think it's an evolution of Facebook to go, that's not what we're for, because the users never engage in that content, and the algorithms never put your posts in anyone's feed. So like, why have the product at all? Why support that?
So your clients are both staffing firms and companies with talent acquisition departments, correct?
They're mainly direct talent acquisition teams today.
Okay.
And when I think about staffing, actually, the largest non-direct will be the RPOs. Like we're used by, I think, 8 of the 10 largest RPOs in the world across all their business. And then large staffing agencies as well, and smaller businesses in different markets. So it's hiring is the common theme, right? If you're in the hiring business, then social talent's for you. It started the other way around, like it was 80% staffing and no RPO in the early days. RPO are really interesting because I've seen over the years that RPO do this thing we call recruiting better than anyone else. Now, a lot of,
why do you think that is?
well, and I think, first of all, a lot of direct TA will go, that's nonsense. We use an RPO and they're not as good, right? On scale and on average, they are better than everybody else, is my point. Of course, there are better in-house recruiters that can do better than the RPO counterpart. But I'm saying, if you take any 20 RPO recruiters and any random 20 in-house team, you'll probably get better productivity and output from the 20 RPO recruiters, because they are a machine. This is, typically an organization with 4,000 people working in recruiting. You can't do it wrong when you have 4,000 people doing it. You got to do it right. Every single marginal gain matters massively. And the contracts you're signing have the lowest margins you'd ever imagine. So you got to do it, deliver a very high quality to differentiate yourself at a very low cost. You have to, force really good processes, really good structure in there, use the best tools and technologies. So I think they just get on with it and they measure everything. That's another reason I think a lot of data, and they make decisions based on data. Whereas I think both of you will concur, a lot of in-house teams want to, but they just really struggle to get the data out there. They're not really as advanced there.
Agreed.
Good
So
stuff.
what does the whole world right now is dealing with a talent shortage? And I know, like in the States, we've got a talent shortage, but we've got an inordinate amount of jobs still open and unfilled. So the job openings keep growing, the talent keeps getting more scarce. So, this thing, I don't know who termed it the Great Resignation, but, a lot of people took the pandemic as an opportunity to say, you know what, maybe there's something better out there for me, and I'm not going to go back to the same old job that I had. I'm going to wait it out. Are you seeing that across all continents that your company serves? And B, what does good look like? Like, how are companies avoiding falling into that rut, and how are they retaining their people versus losing them for other opportunities or no opportunity?
It's a big ass question, John, right?
Sorry.
John.
Really
I was probably longer winded than I wanted to. Sorry.
No, sorry. I mean, you could have said it in 3 words. It's a big ass question, right? It's not the words in question. It's a big thing. So let me try and dive into it. And if I miss something, please ask me to come back on it. We're seeing, of course, that element of supply being a little bit restricted, in that you are seeing, depending on whether you're still giving welfare payments in different markets, folks that are still holding back and not returning. That's a thing. They have, in a lot of markets, given quite large, generous welfare payments over the last 2 years. So people might be able to even hold off a few more months, even if they don't continue to get a welfare payment. That's a thing. You saw a lot of retirees retire early. The US had its highest level of retirement last summer in history. So you're pulling people out at the top of the market. Near the bottom, you had people who are just choosing to opt out and wait. And then you had the middle left. So there are those issues. They're not probably the major factors. I think the major factors are that you're seeing this tremendous change in what is needed skill-wise in the market that came very suddenly. It was always going there, like McKinsey's and others have predicted it and shown the trends of skills that are growing, skills that are dying, but it was kind of continuing at a pretty similar pace, right? So we could cope with it. And then it just hit us like a ton of bricks, right? So, I give the example of a local, you might have a local business that make some local products, and they sell it in their store on their main street, right? That business had to figure out the web and e-commerce in like 4 weeks. Otherwise, they were going to go bust. They had to figure out, how do I service an online market, because no one can come to my store, and I had to close it by law. And the owners were like, I have to survive. And they went and they built Shopify experiences and everything else. And they went, oh, I can sell to loads of people. I can sell to the world. Facebook marketing, how does that work? I can promote myself, et cetera, right? So all these different things change industries really fast, and we need to learn a whole bunch of new skills. So, and then managers in every industry, particularly those that were more office-based, they had to learn how to manage all over again, because you couldn't just manage by observation. You had to actually be a manager, right? So their skills needed to be changed. So all these things have changed really, really fast. And so you're seeing this kind of, it's like putting all the old jobs in a blender, right? And you're kind of blending them back up. You don't really know what's going to come out. So there are more choices. There's folks, for example, who may have worked in hospitality, customer-facing roles in retail for decades, who are saying, I don't want to go back there anymore, because I worry about the safety of my family, of me. I don't want to pick up COVID. I don't want to wear a mask all day long. And they're willing to retrain into other areas. And you have just companies who have, all the tech companies who support, the logistics companies who support those new industries that are exploding, or those growing industries. They have a huge need for more talent, more than there is in the market. So they're the kind of many factors that cause it. What are people doing to kind of fix it? A couple of big themes, right? One is realizing that, recruiters, even that word recruiter and even talent acquisition, we got to reframe what our job is. The job isn't to recruit talent or acquire talent. In fact, it never was. The job is to make sure the right talent is in the right place doing the right job.
It's a great. I love that you just said that.
That's what it always was, the job, right? But we just thought we even our language was wrong, right? So make sure talent is there to do the job, or maybe not even get talent to do it. Make sure the job gets done, even if that actually doesn't involve talent at all, right? But it usually does. So that's become the new role. And a lot of organizations, the large organizations, are changing their org structure around this. They've created a new VP of talent role and got rid of talent acquisition and just rolled it under talent. And they've brought in L&D, internal mobility, leadership training, DE&I in there, because they all connect. What I mean by connecting is when you ask companies, is there a skills shortage, right? And McKinsey did a survey 2 months ago, and 9 out of 10 companies in the world said we either have a skill shortage today or will in the next 3 years. 9 out of 10 companies said that. And so they asked those same companies, what are you doing to fix the problem? Number one way they were fixing the problem was upskilling and reskilling, right? So learning and development by a mile. Number two was moving people internally. And number three was hiring externally, right? So they're the top 3 ways, because you have to combine those 3. There's a couple of others you can use, like contracting and stuff, but they came way down the list. So you're looking at re-educating folks in the business, right? Which ties into internal mobility and the recruiting team. It all connects, in my opinion, and it offers more opportunity for inclusion. And internal mobility is a big thing. It's like we have to stop just looking externally. We have to build talent. We've got to reskill folks, because we might have parts of our business that are now it's not relevant to the new world. Rather than letting all those people go and paying them money, and then hiring all these people and paying them money, you're like, well, can we just move the people into different jobs? Can we just do that, please? And you realize that internal mobility, which has been around for decades, it's not a new thing, but it was a separate thing to recruiting, right? And to me, it's like recruiters are brilliant at spotting talent for the opportunity, but let them loose on your internal talent.
Yep.
That's the key thing. And give them the support to fill gaps, because there are advantages to internal talent over external talent that might give them an edge over a skill gap. So if you can enable that recruiter to work in a team with colleagues that can also fill some of the skill gaps. If I can go to Richard here and say, he's the hiring manager and I'm the recruiter, and say, this is my candidate, John. John's internal. He doesn't have skill 2 and 4 that you're looking for, but I can put him on an internal program to give him 2 and 4 within 3 months. Now I do have this external person who has all the skills you want, but there's these risks that they'll churn, they're going to be a higher cost, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to promote John, because I think John is someone I can work with to get to you what you need faster to do the job, and is a lower risk for the business. It's having conversations like that. That's how organizations are solving these problems, and that's where it all comes together.
And how often do you have someone that is good for the company culture? They might be in the wrong role for them. And it goes back to, this goes back to, Jim Collins and, getting the right people on the bus. You're right. That's always been the role. Recruiters, we find talent, we deliver talent, but is it the right talent for that role? And if it's not, everyone has to be willing to admit, okay, found a great person, just not good for this role. What else do we have for them based on what they like, what their passion is, and what they're good at, and then explore those opportunities? And also, I think there's a stigma. I'd like to think it's starting to lift, but before, people are always wanting growth, and they want to keep learning. And I don't know if you're seeing this, but that doesn't necessarily mean vertical growth. That can also mean horizontal growth into other roles. It doesn't have to be the traditional ladder that we were ingrained in. That's kind of changed over the years. Are you seeing that too?
We work with a fantastic woman who is a speaker on our platform on this topic, a lady called Bev Kay, who lives out of LA. And Bev has been in the industry a long time, and she's just super smart. And she wrote a book many, many decades ago that's kind of come back into fashion in the last 2 years, called Up Is Not the Only Way, which is exactly what what you're talking about, John.
Exactly.
And she defines 7 ways for you to progress in your career, 6 of which are not moving upwards, right? And I think that's what you're seeing today. You know, when people talk about the number one reason folks leave a job, which is also the number one reason they are attracted to a job, is career opportunity, right? Opportunities to advance. And again, traditionally, you're so right, John. We've seen that as upwards mobility. And that's not what we're talking about. Like, you could get an assignment, a project, move, do 20% of your work somewhere else. You can move teams. You could take a different career path. There's so many ways that you can progress in your role without going up. And up sometimes is absolutely the wrong way. Like,
Yeah.
we know a lot of recruiters that were made managers, and they're crap managers, right? They're great recruiters, you know. But what I do see is that because the market's so crazy, we have been forced to, similar to what we talked about, why did people stop using Indeed, right? People did what I call experience-based hiring for years because they could, right? I want to hire somebody who understands software sales. Well, I'll just hire someone who works in a software company in sales, and I'll ask her, how did you get on? Did you meet targets? And she says yes. And if her environment sounds like my environment, I'll just go with that and hire her. That doesn't work because those people aren't applying for your jobs, and you can't even source them, and you can't track them for the right salaries. So we finally had to get back to skills-based hiring. What are the skills and competencies required to do this job? And then we had to change our assessment procedures and interview procedures to then adapt to this. And many companies are still struggling with this because it's different. It's a different way to interview. It's a different way to assess. And it's a different way to build your hiring criteria. So there's a huge change in this in the last year in particular. But that's brilliant, right? Because when you look, again, back to something like diversity and inclusion, the biggest challenge in diversity is that folks who were marginalized for a long time didn't have the right CV or resume. They didn't have the experience. They hadn't got the opportunity. Now we're back to skills-based hiring, which is a real leveler out there, because like, you don't ever have had to have the opportunity to work in the cool company or whatever. Do you have the measurable skills that we can assess for that would show us that you are likely to be successful in this role? And that's what excites me about the next decade of recruiting.
Love it.
Good stuff. All right. So my last question, short ass question, short ass, John. But what's your forecast, Johnny, for the rest of 2022 for recruiting and staffing industry? What's the forecast, my man?
Sunshine with spots of rain and snow along the way. Yeah, but true. So like the Great Resignation has peaked. It won't be as hard this year. I think you're going to see, continued adoption of technology to help with the volume problem, because you can't and shouldn't just hire more recruiters into the team to solve the problem. You should really look at your process and look to make it more efficient, because the tools are out there, right? So we may disagree on different types of tools, but there's enough out there you can make work for your team to automate stuff, make the process work better candidate experience, right? So I think that's going to be a continued theme. I think you're going to see this continued progress and or acceleration of this movement from being just the recruiter to being a talent advisor. And that's not a talent acquisition advisor, a talent advisor, where, whether you're in staffing or whether you're in-house, your job is to work with the team or the organization or the hiring manager to solve her problem of, I need somebody here to be delivering a sales target or to design stuff or come up with stuff. And you have to be a bit wider in the toolbox you can provide to solve that problem. So you're going to have to learn and develop those skills. I think you're going to see recruiters moving increasingly towards learning more core skills. Like, that's what we see in the analytics on our platform, hundreds of thousands of recruiters and hiring managers logging on and learning. It's less and less about technical skills, like how do you do Boolean searching or use that tool or technology. It's a lot more about persuasion. How do I influence? How do I influence with data? Do storytelling? How do I sell? How can I communicate better? It's always been a thing, but it's just really shifting in that direction, right? You mentioned, John, the instructional training we've always had in the past. We actually have less on screen now because there's less things to show you, because it was about where do you put the search term in on the LinkedIn, or which button do you press on the job board. Like, technology is getting better at that stuff and doing it for you, right? But it isn't going to solve for you. And where I think the recruiters and the talent professionals are moving more towards are those core skills, those human skills, those influence skills, persuasion, adaptability, coming up with creative ideas to solve the problems. So I think there's been a lot more of that. So you're seeing the structures being a little bit different. So technology, those kind of structures, and a continued focus on inclusion. We used to, Many teams had diversity recruiters. I'm using air quotes for those who can't see me. Everyone's a diversity recruiter today. You have to be.
Yeah.
Right. You give, inclusive shortlists, and that's it, period. Right. So that's become just a thing you got to work on. And that's a new skill for folks to adapt to. And you got to work with the hiring organizations you're working with to try and make them better at that as well. So a bunch of things that aren't necessarily new themes, but they're a continued acceleration of stuff that, when you pull back, it's kind of obvious. Improve the tech to make the tech stack work better. Focus more on the consultancy advisory core skills as well there as a team. And probably, more focus on how do you achieve the end results by being a little bit more optimized. Like one thing I was talking to a friend about last week was the growth of talent operations or talent acquisition operations, which wasn't a role 10 years ago, right? But that TA ops is the kind of get things done project person that frees up all the time for the other recruiters, right? So when you think on scale, if you're going to hire one role this year, and this is not my advice, this was given to me. If you've got approval for 10 recs, hire 9 recruiters, but keep one role back for a TA ops person. The other person is going to get things done, get training done, implement new systems, you put the better processes in. Like on scale, on any sort of scale, TA needs an ops person who's dedicated to making scale things work for everyone else. Stop just having everyone doing recruiting. It doesn't work, right? So that's my role of the future, I predict, from 2022.
There it is, right there from Johnny Campbell.
Love it.
Hey, John, any final thoughts, man, on what we talked about today, brother?
I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and experience, Johnny. Thanks so much for being on. A couple things stood out that are not so traditional, and I love the concept that you mentioned of within the talent organization of a company, about having someone, talent acquisition is always geared toward, we're going to find somebody and bring them in, versus let me look at the talent I have and see if there's people we can move internally. Employees are always applying for other jobs, but do you have someone internally that's focused on helping to identify who should be where? And it all gets back to what you said. Just make sure that as a recruiter, it's not just about finding a person that's qualified to do the job. It's finding the right person in the right job. And I really love that.
100%. If you think about, the hiring manager, right? You can imagine you've got internal talent and external talent. The external talent is being vetted, curated, prepared for you by the recruiter, given a nice shortlist. Typically, the internal talent is a pile of resumes this high, right? So who are you going to go for? You're going to probably go for the external talent that's all nicely prepped for you with information. You got to look at your process to say, make it equal. Talent's talent. Apply the same high-level process to all talent. Vet them all the same. But you can't have these two teams working anymore. Just like you can't have a diversity recruiter, you can't have an internal recruiter. You just got people solving the talent problem. That's it.
Man, good stuff. Hey, Johnny, once again, hey, thank you for coming on the show and sharing your cutting-edge knowledge. Everybody out there, follow John. He's got 1 million followers on every social media platform ever. And then Social Talent. Check out Social Talent. I tell you what, I learned so much from there. It's cutting edge. I can say, Johnny, keep up the great work, man. We love everything that you put out there, man. I absorb it all, buddy.
It's only because I'm 5 hours ahead of all of you.
You can see in the future. And Johnny, you also host a podcast. Where can people listen to that?
Sure. Our podcast goes live at 11 a.m. Eastern time, 8 a.m. Pacific time, every Wednesday on YouTube or LinkedIn. It's called The Shortlist, but you can follow the podcast and listen to recordings. There's 88 episodes live so far on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts, after you've listened to this show first, of course.
Exactly. Oh, well, hey, thanks again. Across from the pond with Johnny Campbell. We'll talk to you later, guys. Take care.
Good to see you, Johnny. Take care.